Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of American Heat. I'm Ron Moore. We're riding along with the hazardous material response team of Houston, Texas Fire Department. We got a call of an 1.5-inch gas line ruptured in a residential neighborhood. We're moving in on that now. Before we go hazmat, why don't you go to our American Heat news desk?
Hello and thanks for joining me. I'm Aki Rumsey. A grand jury in Ashtabula County, Ohio has indicted a man in the shooting of 2 volunteer firefighters. 41-year-old George Wolf is charged with attempted murder, felonious assault, illegally possessing a gun, and disruption of public service. Wolf is accused of shooting Monroe Township Assistant Fire Chief Justin Tuttle and firefighter Jim Kraninski while they were assisting an ambulance crew giving medical help to a woman. Chief Tuttle, who was shot in the head, has been released from the hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. Kraninski has recovered from a gunshot to the lower back and has returned to work. In Birmingham, Alabama, firefighters were attacked for turning off an open fire plug. Children were playing around the hydrant when firefighters arrived. As firefighters were leaving, a crowd of people threw bricks, mud, and rocks at them. Police assisted firefighters as they returned to shut off other open hydrants. Battalion Chief Doug Morgan says he understands it's hot, but it's dangerous and illegal to open hydrants. The possibility of a derailment or truck accident has some concern about a plan to move nuclear waste into a New Mexico salt bed facility. Proponents say it's safe and large. Critics say it's a hazmat nightmare waiting to happen. Charles Ziwi reports.
It's the U.S. Energy Department's Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, the world's largest nuclear waste dump. In rooms as long as football fields, plutonium-contaminated garbage from decades of making atomic bombs will be stored forever. Workers are already practicing how they'll handle the low-level material. Most of it is clothing, tools, sludge, and soil. Eventually, most of the waste at the facility will be contained in 850,000 55-gallon drums just like these. Once the rooms are filled, nature will take its course. Engineers say the salt will encapsulate the waste, preventing any of it from leaking. Although workers have undergone exhaustive safety training, critics worry. They say oil wells pumping on the repository's perimeter may one day lead drillers to puncture the waste pit, releasing radioactivity. DOE experts say any release would be minimal.
Even if that does happen, we are still well within the standards that EPA has established as being the safe boundaries for this type of thing.
There's also concern about how the waste gets to Carlsbad. Waste will be trucked to the site from nuclear facilities in 10 states. All of it will be moved along major highways with no special security escort. The waste, however, will be sealed in carbon steel drums the DOE dropped, punctured, and burned to prove they won't release radiation in the event of an accident.
You'd have to eat it or sniff it. You have to ingest the material for it to pose any risk to the public.
New Mexico Attorney General Tom Udall remains unconvinced.
And can you, with waste that was packaged up several decades ago, really be able to say what's in the barrels?
The state attorney general says until he knows for sure what's in the barrels, he may sue to keep the waste dump from opening. A 12-alarm fire swept through a block of row houses, killing an elderly woman in Camden, New Jersey. Firefighters fought the flames from high-rise ladders, but the 12-alarm fire kept growing. 130 firefighters and 50 pieces of equipment were used in the effort. 10 of the 14 row houses were occupied when the fire started. 50 people were left homeless. The city fire marshal says the fire was accidentally set by a teenager who lit candles in an upstairs bedroom. Fireworks may be responsible for a blast that injured 17 people and knocked a house off its foundation in San Francisco. 2 other homes were also destroyed. Officials say 24 M80 fireworks were found near the home, along with cardboard tubes similar to those used to store fireworks. One of the victims suffered burns over 60% of his body. A fire sprinkler considered unreliable by the Consumer Product Safety Commission failed to activate in an Arizona apartment fire. A woman received first-degree burns to her hands and nose. It's the first known injury caused by an Omega brand sprinkler. In March, the CPSC asked for a national recall of the sprinklers, but Central Sprinkler challenged the recall. Now, a judge has rejected the sprinkler company's claim that the CPSC lacked authority for the recall. Tests conducted by the Fairfax County, Virginia Fire and Rescue Department concluded a 35% failure rate with the Omegas. Central Sprinkler's Vice President for Customer Relations says the company's lawyers are considering an appeal. A congressman from Louisiana wants a national 911 emergency phone number, one that will assist emergency responders before they arrive on the scene. Patty Davis has the story.
These crash test dummies are part of a government experiment. The crash triggers an electronic black box in the car. The box automatically calls 911 with the car's location and condition. The technology is so promising, members of Congress are jumping on board.
What we are saying today is we will accept nothing less than full cooperation with the deployment of this technology so that emergency help can come to Americans when they need it most.
I can verify that the end-to-end system would have an immediate impact on dramatically reducing response time, not only for crash victims, but for other life-threatening emergencies such as heart attacks.
The black box is at least 5 years down the road. For now, the nation's 59 million wireless phone users have to dial for help themselves, but it's confusing. The universally accepted way of getting help in an emergency, dialing 911, doesn't always apply to wireless phone users. For example, dialing 911 in Chicago will get you emergency services, but just outside the city limits, 911 won't work. You have to dial star 999. Towson is trying to change that. He's calling for a national 911 for all wireless phones.
It ought to be that all Americans know there is a single number, no matter where you are, that you call for this kind of assistance.
This 911 center in Chicago handles thousands of calls every day. Emergency calls from wireless phone users have doubled over the past year.
To be able to reach over in your car seat, pick up your telephone, your cellular phone, and dial 911 makes it more convenient for the citizen and better for emergency response.
Something safety experts say would go a long way towards saving lives.
Some members of Congress expressed support for first responders nationwide. Howard Levy has the story.
That's the sound that will hopefully draw Congress's attention to an important issue for the fire service. Thousands of emergency responders rallied at our nation's capital in support of legislation that will prepare the fire and emergency community for terrorist attacks involving chemical and biological weapons. Congressman Kurt Weldon, a former volunteer firefighter, is helping raise awareness on the issue.
What I'm saying in my legislation is the President and the leaders in the Congress need to appoint 15 people in a bipartisan way to sit down and straighten this mess out. And as they do that and decide what role each agency should play, they also need to consider what resources we should be helping to provide for the local emergency fire and EMS people around the country who are always going to be the first in on these incidents.
Other members of Congress stand behind the fire service and give their full support for better training and funding.
When that day comes and that horrible explosion or sickness occurs, they will not call the environmental analysts. They will not call the policy planners. They won't even call the Office of Management and Budget. They'll call the first responder community across the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, if they're going to call you first, then they should fund you first.
120 cities across the nation are already receiving some training on how to detect chemical warfare, but many in the fire service say more needs to be accomplished to achieve their goals in case a real situation comes about.
We do normal responses every day. We don't normally do acts of terrorism, but I know it's going to happen, especially we're in Prince George's County, right next to the District of Columbia. But the problem is we don't have the funding needed to do these special types of responses that are required for acts of terrorism, which include hazmat incidences that involve multiple patients, which may happen in case there is some type of chemical act of terrorism. So I'm here to support that legislation. I think it's much needed for the fire service.
The money will better prepare us just in case of a chemical warfare, biological warfare, an emergency that we don't have the equipment to handle. With the necessary money, the men would be better trained and better knowledgeable to handle those situations.
And hopefully those situations won't happen anytime soon. I'm Howard Levy reporting for American Heat News.
7 members of the Chicago Fire Department have been fired and 21 others suspended without pay for taking part in a 1990 firehouse party. The party took place 8 years ago, but a home videotape surfaced in December showing on- and off-duty firemen drinking, making racial slurs, and exposing themselves. Chief Stanley Spann says the suspensions will range from 6 to 60 days. The head of the department's Internal Affairs Division resigned amid criticism that the Fire Commission had not properly investigated the party. And congratulations to the East Fishkill Fire Department in Dutchess County, New York. The district has opened this administration building and training center, the first in the county. There are about 40 fire districts in Dutchess County. East Fishkill boasts 300 volunteer members, and this facility holds meeting rooms and a 3-story tower with a burn room. Before this was built, the firefighters had to travel up to 45 minutes to receive training. Thanks to East Fishkill's Scott Post for sending that video. That's all the news for this month. Let's go back to Houston, Texas now and find out how the responders are handling that natural gas leak.
It's dangerous, it can be dirty, and it's far from what the public thinks of when they think of firefighters. But hazardous materials response is an important part of our duties. In industrial areas like Houston, Texas, specialized hazmat teams are a necessity. The Houston teams average 8 runs a day, but no call is considered routine.
We've arrived on scene and we found a parking lot that's been excavated, and the contractor pulled up an old gas line that went to an old building that was here. What we're going to do is the line is kinked and we need to plug the line. So we need to cut off the line behind the kink. Then we're going to stick an 1¼ inch expansion plug inside the pipe and expand the pipe and turn off the gas.
Now that the leak is plugged, the utility company makes its final notes, and the hazmat team is off to another call.
Well, now that Houston has that incident under control, I want to officially welcome you to the American Heat program on hazardous materials. Ironically, our theme is hazmat, flammable liquids, and flammable gases. We have some good training programs and some good incidents to cover that will serve as in-service training for you as hazmat ops level personnel or responders at the hazmat technician level. Our first incident, besides this Texas gas leak, occurred in Tampa, Florida. An MC-306 tanker truck transporting gasoline through a residential neighborhood is involved in a crash and a rollover, and we'll use that as a focus as we get started on our incident case study number 1.
In March of 1996, a tanker truck carrying about 8,000 gallons of gasoline was involved in a collision just north of Beta Bay Boulevard on Del Mabry Highway. This area of town, known as Palma Sierra, is predominantly a residential neighborhood. Along the 4-lane highway, there is a mix of small businesses, churches, and day schools. There is also a public high school. The highway itself is a very busy main road. The initial alarm came in just before 7 in the morning, and the tanker would lay on its side across the main highway until well into the afternoon. During the 12 hours the Tampa Fire Department was on scene, many different social, emergency, and pollution control agencies played a key role in the protection of the public and of the environment.
This is Tampa Fire Rescue.
This is Driver Engineer Torrance.
Yes.
We have a tanker that's upside down.
Yes, what's it
in Granada and Del Mabry.
Is it leaking?
It is leaking, definitely. I didn't even see this. We have 2 vans.
Del Mabry and Beta Bay go upside tanker leaking.
We have 2 vans, a small car also involved.
2 vans and a car involved.
We have people trapped in the car and one of the vans right now. Hey, we have gasoline. It's 12:03.
Okay, gasoline. Am I going to need more than just 1 rescue?
Oh, you're going to need at least, let's get 3 rescues on the way. Let's get a second alarm on the way.
On scene in the first few minutes after the accident were fire crews from Station 14.
The first thing I saw was the tanker that was tipped over. Where we approached, we were heading south on Del Mabry, and there was a 3-car pileup about a block away from the tanker on the opposite side, which we did not see until we got up around next to the tanker. We assisted some other firefighters in digging out a trench and diking the gasoline so it wouldn't go any further down into the sewage.
Initially, the accident scene presented many hazards, not only to the accident victims, but also to residents, the fire crews, and the environment. Captain Pete Barno took initial command of the emergency scene.
Well, number one, of course, life safety. We had the people trapped in the car, so that was our first concern. And then after that, we started thinking about containment and stuff, which was life safety in the neighborhoods and everywhere else. We knew right off the bat that we had product going into the sewer, and we had it draining down towards the cars where the people were trapped, and then we had it going in on the other side of the street, which was flowing down towards Plant High School. But we didn't know until later on how far it had gone or where we could stop it at. So we were thinking along these things, but resources, getting it covered with foam certainly was a major concern, and just what we were going to need. We knew right off the bat we were in for a long-term thing. We knew we're going to need a lot of resources, a lot of people. Mutual aid started coming into mind right off the bat.
Captain Barno established the groundwork for the incident priorities. For any emergency, the incident priorities are life safety first, followed by scene stabilization, then conservation of property and the environment. The initial life safety concern was for the accident victims. The truck driver and the motorist in all 3 vehicles were rapidly removed from the scene. Thanks to these quick actions, despite how serious the accident appeared, there was no loss of life. Also in the life safety concern was the possibility that gasoline pouring out of the tanker might ignite. At all hazardous materials incidents, there are a set of standard strategic goals that the incident commander should follow. These goals help the incident commander obtain his scene priorities of life safety, scene stabilization, and conservation. By handling the large problem, one small piece at a time, an emergency becomes much more manageable. The strategic goals at hazardous materials releases are scene isolation, notifications, product identification, protection of public and responders, spill control, leak control, fire control, and recovery and termination procedures. Tampa Fire Department has listed each of these activities on an action plan checklist to remind the fire officer in charge of the scene what needs to be done. Some items on the action plan may be easier to control than others, depending upon the situation and the product involved. Let's look at each one of these areas separately and see how emergency responders dealt with each area during the course of this tanker emergency. Once on the scene, it is the responsibility of the fire department to try and prevent a situation from becoming worse. At a hazardous materials release, one of the fastest ways to make sure the scene is more manageable is to assure that the leaking product can no longer freely come in contact with people. In this situation, isolating the scene required the fire department to quickly rescue persons trapped in their cars and to evacuate citizens from the area. Also, once the citizens and victims are safe, the person in charge must assure that firefighting personnel do not remain in dangerous positions. This is done by assuring that all fire crews are in safe areas and only go into dangerous or hot zones when properly protected and for a specific reason. The incident commander must quickly notify other agencies that can respond to assist. The obvious first thing to ensure is that a hazardous materials team is responding. If the Tampa team is unavailable due to alarms or other reasons, then the Hillsborough County team can be requested for mutual aid. In this situation, with several thousand gallons of gasoline spilled or leaking, the threat to the public was great. Therefore, a mandatory evacuation area was established. But the police and fire departments cannot just shout, get out," without providing evacuated citizens with some place to go. When an evacuation is ordered, the local Emergency Operations Center, or EOC for short, is notified.
The county warning point contacted me and told me of the potential of having to evacuate a large portion of southern Tampa We got in touch immediately with the Tampa Fire Dispatch Center and got the definition of the affected area, how many square blocks it was. We went immediately into our database looking for any critical facilities, which are like schools, nursing homes, hospitals, or anything like that. And we discovered there was a nursing home that was just a couple of blocks outside of the current evacuation area. We got in touch with that administrator of that nursing home and said he was very close to a mandatory evacuation zone for him to have heads up that if they had to expand the zone that he'd have to evacuate.
Other agencies that should be notified include the tanker company who owns the truck, the Coast Guard if waterways are threatened, other environmental agencies, storm drains, street departments, and other city agencies can come to assist. At the tanker rollover on Dale Mabry Highway, all of these agencies came in, and each one had a key role to play in the successful outcome of this accident.
We'll fix the clamp and then we'll reassess what we need to do next.
Sometimes product identification is an easy process, but other times this can take some effort. The incident commander is encouraged to verify all sources of information that provide for chemical identification. For example, placards provide some initial clues to what the product may be, but shipping papers help to confirm the product being shipped. Also, interviews with the truck driver or other company representatives will further assure what product or products are involved. At the tanker rollover, several sources were used to confirm the product was gasoline. There were placards on the truck, interviews with the driver, and confirmation from shipping papers. When the scene was initially isolated, some protection was provided to the fire crews and the public. However, as more information about the release is gathered, plans may have to be changed. At all hazardous materials scenes, there must be a safety officer assigned. This officer is responsible for the general safe planning and carrying out of procedures that will occur. Other considerations include the selection of appropriate personal protective equipment and decontamination procedures. Also, in the considering of safety of responders, a rehabilitation area must be established. In rehab, the fire and hazmat crews should be protected from the elements, given cursory medical checks to assure that they are not physically exhausted. Additionally, food and fluids should be provided. At this tanker rollover, spill control required an intensive amount of time and personnel. Once the spill is controlled, an attempt to stop any ongoing leaks should be made.
The difference between leak control and spill control is essentially the difference between confinement and containment. When we speak of spill control, we're talking about remote actions to confine the area of the spill itself. Examples would be damming and diking of the product, and these are defensive measures that can be taken by first responder personnel, whereas leak control actually involves containing the product in its container. And this is a bit more hazardous, requires a bit more training, and for that reason we generally use hazmat technicians for leak control, because that puts a person in close proximity to the product and there is a potential there for contact with the product. So except for an unusual circumstance, we would always use technicians for leak control.
Most of the fuel that was escaping from the tanker was coming from the dome covers. Hazmat technicians from the Tampa Fire Department used specially manufactured dome clamps to secure these large leaks. Although fire control is listed near the bottom of the action plan, it may be one of the first items that needs to be addressed. At the tanker rollover, one of the major priorities was to keep ignition sources under control. Luckily, the fuel did not ignite during the accident, and fire crews were determined to ensure that ignition did not occur. Besides the gasoline that was pooled on the streets, many hundreds of gallons went into the storm drains. Fuel in the storm drains presents some very serious hazards to emergency responders. To make the fuel in the drains safer to handle, the Department of Environmental Protection authorized the fire department to use a product called an emulsifier. This product would cause the fuel and water in the storm drains to mix rather than having the gasoline floating on top. Within a reasonable period of time, the responders at the tanker rollover had completed most of their hazardous materials action plan. The scene had been isolated, citizens were evacuated, and only emergency personnel in proper gear were allowed into the hot zones. With most of the concerns addressed, it was now time to start thinking about how to clean up the mess. The most time-consuming phase of the accident cleanup was collecting the spilled gasoline. To assist in this matter, vacuum trucks were brought in to pick up the wayward fuel. The vacuum truck operations continued for several hours. During this phase of operation, fire crews continually monitored the scene with sophisticated gas detectors and kept the foam blanket intact. When the majority of the gasoline was picked up from the street, it was time to begin the removal of the fuel that still remained in the overturned tanker. At this incident, the fire department allowed a private recovery company, Steps Wrecker, to perform the pump-off procedure. Once the pump-off was accomplished, it was time to bring in the big rigs and remove the damaged tanker off of the highway. This was another dangerous time because of the condition of the damaged tanker and the probability that some gasoline did remain uncollected inside of the tanker. Steps Wrecker was also called upon to upright and remove the damaged truck. This type of operation is not just a lot of guesswork. These recovery experts studied and planned for every move before they set their big rigs into motion. Once recovery of the tanker was completed, fire department operations at the scene were almost over with. A final survey of the area was done to assure that all hazards were corrected. About 6:30 p.m., nearly 12 hours after the accident had occurred, the decision was made to cancel the evacuation order.
The chief in charge of the hazmat team here in Houston at Station 22 is District Chief Danny Snell. We caught up with Chief Snell to get his perspective on fire departments, industrial groups, as well as hazmat teams. What should we be considering as far as the use or the application of emulsifiers, typical of what you saw used in the Tampa incident? So on the topic of emulsifiers, here's Chief Snell's report.
Well, some of the considerations that you have to take in on emulsifiers is, obviously going to be price. We try to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, with the citizens' money. And whenever you start comparing these products, you have to compare their performance and actually look at them. We're not really lab technicians or anything like that, but what we do is we look at them from an aspect of a firefighter. How does it work out in the field? For one thing is you look at the application. How will you apply it? By and far, most fire departments are going to apply it through booster lines or trash lines, which entails that you've got to get it into the water supply of some way, either by ducting it or either by mixing it into the tanks. Here in Houston, we mix it into the booster tanks, which requires that the product has to be totally miscible in water without a lot of agitation. Otherwise, you'll get a big slug of concentrated solution down in the bottom of the tank, and you're not going to get very much application. So miscibility of it is one of the things. How well does it perform? In the industry setting, they use the emulsifiers to clean process equipment, and then it goes into a separator, and they like for the product to separate out into raw products so they can reclaim it, re-refine it, and cut down on their waste. In the setting that we're in, what we like for it to do is to encapsulate it and hold it in suspension for days so that Mother Nature and the evaporative process can take its place. You need to be careful with the product. Depending on the product and what it does, if it totally encaps and seals the flammable liquid, then you may be safe in using it in flammable atmospheres. Typically what an emulsifier or dispersant does is it breaks the hydrocarbon down into smaller particles, which really increases the surface area of the product. And when you increase the surface area of the product, the evaporation is a lot faster, and you actually get a more intense fire when you emulsify it. So you really need to be careful with flammable vapors and the use of emulsifiers and dispersants. There's a lot of products are being touted as what I've heard to be called an EFFF, an emulsifying film forming foam. To my knowledge, there are none of them that carry a UL rating. That's the first questions we ask. If you're using it for fire suppression or for firefighting, then does it carry a UL rating? Does it meet NFPA foam standards? If it doesn't, then there's probably a better product out there. In our comparisons with the EFFFs to the AFFFs and alcohol type foams, they don't perform as well as the foams do. They're also priced more than foams. So it's a question of if you're going to use it for blanket and vapor suppression, or if you're going to use it for firefighting, then why not go ahead and use the foam? Bottom line is I wouldn't take any of the salespeople for any product at face value. If you've got the time and you have the luxury of doing it, is to actually take the product and do some field testing. Ask them to leave you 5-10 gallons of the product to try. Take it out and try it. Try it against water, try it against foam, try it against other products, and get some kind of performance measure that you can make a good decision with.
Our next hazmat case study is from Mankato, Minnesota, where responders are called to the scene of a gasoline tanker truck rollover. There's been a leak, and now there's gasoline spilling on Riverfront Drive. As we watch this story unfold, we'll realize the background behind a hazmat philosophy of stabilizing the incident, then stabilizing the environment.
We received the dispatch from our law enforcement center at about noon the day of the incident, and as luck would have it, the hazardous material spill was just 2 blocks from our fire station number 1, so we responded directly on site there. What had happened is at this T intersection in Mankato, a tanker truck rolled over as he was negotiating a turn, and he was carrying gasoline, and the truck had rolled over onto its side and was leaking product from 2 areas on the trailer. When we arrived at the scene, we immediately saw to the safety of the driver and wanted to see if he needed any medical attention. After that was accomplished, we assessed the scene and immediately decided that our first priority was to dike the product that was leaking down the hill into the storm sewers. We immediately called for our street department to bring some sand, and we put two dams in place to contain the product. After that, we looked at the leaks, and we were able to stop the leaks, or about 90% of the leaks, with using wooden dowels. And we collected what was still leaking using actually stock tanks that we got from a local purveyor. Very little of the product got into the storm sewers, which hook right into our river. Mankato is a river town. What we did to help mitigate that hazard is we monitored the storm sewers, and then we placed a boom around the sewer outlet into the river with absorbent pads so that we could collect any product that might go into the river.
I was assigned to the sewer sector. I got a lot of help from the city utility workers and street workers, and we actually went down into the sewer system, into the sanitary sewer, and monitored for gas and tried to see if there was any gas had gotten down there. And a little bit had gotten down. The streets people had done an excellent job. They got trucks full of sand. They had diked up the gas, prevented most of it from going down the storm sewer. And given the amount of time this was on quite a slope, and this gas was going down pretty well. So I'd say we did amazingly well with the help of streets to stop the flow of that gas, keep it out of the storm sewers. But the little that got in there, we kind of followed downstream, and we'd managed to dike it up before it got out to the river. Somewhere along the line, PCA, the Pollution Control Agency, showed up, and I was assigned to be their liaison as well.
The one thing that I'll remember most on this incident is that we had just spent 2 years preparing to be a state chemical assessment team, and we all kind of wondered whether or not we'd use this. And 1 month out, we were from being awarded the contract and being placed in service, we were able to use our skills and what we'd trained on. So my answer to that is be prepared. Hazmat can happen anywhere, anytime.
We expect all initial first responders, firefighters, police officers, and EMS to be able to go out and recognize and identify that a hazardous materials incident has occurred. At that point in time, the state of Minnesota has taken upon itself to provide assistance to these local responders. Initially, what will happen is they'll call the state duty officer, and the state duty officer will dispatch what's called a chemical assessment team. The chemical assessment team responds in a Suburban with a trailer, and its primary function is to do chemical assessment hazards analysis, to provide a more in-depth identification of all the concerns at an incident, and to provide that assistance to that local incident commander, so that the incident commander can recognize whether or not this particular incident is beyond their capabilities or not. If the chemical assessment teams feels that a more advanced level is needed, particularly in the area of actually stopping the leak out of the trailer or out of the tank or out of the overturned rail car, they will call in an emergency response team, an ERT. And these have all the heavy equipment to do those activities.
Here's a product that may help hazmat teams when they respond to those tanker truck spills. It's from Interspace Environmental Technologies. and it's called the 911 Catch System. The 911 Catch System is a portable, lightweight system for the collection and transfer of hazardous material spills. The system includes a basin, a hose, hardware, and a bladder. There's other optional equipment available like a non-spark hammer, pegs, and tie-downs. The 911 Catch System is lightweight and it's stored in a compact container that can be easily carried on board most types of vehicles, like your hazardous material truck. The 911 Catch System is simply and easily deployed. Each system contains all the components needed by one person for rapid response to an accidental discharge. 911 Catch Systems are available in a range of sizes from 75 to 5,000 gallons. The system is constructed of durable polyurethane-coated polyester. For more information on this, you can call Brent Parsley at Interspace Environmental Technologies at 2450 Alhambra Boulevard, Suite 100, Sacramento, California. His phone number is 916-736-6849.
For our next incident case study, we'll travel to Grand Haven Charter Township Fire Department in Michigan. Their incident is unique in the challenges it presents. It starts out also in a unique way. Lieutenant Bruce Palm, on duty at the fire station that day, is out front of the station about 2:45 in the afternoon. Suddenly he notices an orange glow off to his side down the street. What Lieutenant Palm discovers is that a bulldozer working along a roadway project has actually ruptured and torn into a high-pressure petroleum pipeline running along the side of the road. And what Lieutenant Palm discovered 5.5 hours later is brought under control in a very successful textbook response. So we'll travel to Michigan now and find out what unique challenges are there when we're dealing with these types of pipeline emergencies. I want to use the Telestrator, my electronic chalkboard, to illustrate some of the teaching points that we can all learn from the Wolverine pipeline fire incident. This is the scene as firefighters arrive, with the exception of the fire has actually died down at this point. But we can see that there was significantly a lack of structural exposure. Most all the exposures in all directions were natural vegetation. Also notice along the foreground here, you can see that the railroad is right near the fire. The fire itself is confined to the pipeline with the bulldozer sitting right on top of it. As the first due company arrived, they confirmed the fire again with flames 50 to 100 feet high, and they made a determination at that point that the fire would be left to burn. The patient, who is a burn victim, was originally the bulldozer operator, and he is quickly treated by the first arriving fire companies. Also, a medical unit is requested for his transport. The dozer operator was caught in the flash fire, and the product that's leaking and now burning is high-pressure pipeline transporting gasoline. The dozer operator was involved in the flash fire and had severe burns. Now, as the company's set up, we'll stop the action here to show you some of the actions that they took that are significant. They've established a scene control zone, and they've also begun to establish here on the highway part of their sustained water supply operations. What you see being set up here in the corner of this frame is actually a drop tank, and they're going to run a tanker shuttle with one of their units, as well as requesting other tankers from the Robinson and the Port Sheldon fire departments. Now that continues to provide water to fight the fire, but remember, it's particularly just, in this case, a defensive operation. Tanker water is primarily used to supply hand lines that have been stretched, as we see here, to protect the immediate area, about 200 feet in all directions, were protected with the initial hand lines off the tanker shuttle. At that point, Incident Command decides to make a sustained water supply. This engine works now off of a 5-inch line laid in from a hydrant, and that continues to stabilize the scene. I want to stop the action here just for a moment so we can get a perspective of what's happened. Crowd control, traffic control, scene control, all notifications have been made. Here is a sustained water supply coming off the hydrant. In this case, they flowed a total of over 20,000 gallons of water, protecting the natural vegetation exposures. Things continue from 2:45 in the afternoon for almost an hour. By 45 minutes into the incident, the fire had reduced itself down to 20-foot flames. Now, Lieutenant Bruce Palm, our original firefighter at the station, first due company officer, is asked to come over here, and he's going to stand in an area right about here, and he'll be interviewed by a local news reporter with the fire burning in the background. And we're going to listen in on some of Lieutenant Palm's interview. He's asked by the local reporter what the fire department actions are at this point. Let's listen in as he explains.
At this time, just protect the exposures, keep everybody away from it because, you know, I don't know if you were here quick enough, but the heat was all the way up to here. At this time, we do have the pump shut down, and also what you see burning is residual fuel in the line, and we're just going to let it burn because that's safer than having it just put the fire out and then have a petroleum product seeping into the ground, especially when it's raining out. So at this point, this is the safest way to go. Just keep our hand lines far enough back, let it burn until we get the proper authorities up here to take care of it.
Again, textbook examples of what you should do, protecting the scene and then protecting the environment. Now, as Lieutenant Palm ends his interview, he's asked to compare this fire with others that he has been to. And at that point, 60 minutes into the event, an unusual incident occurs, and we got it on tape.
Pretty impressive. I've seen some other fires that have been just as big, and I believe that's Did you get I jumped. Oh my God. Apparently what you just saw was the fuel tank from the bulldozer taking off.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you probably just heard me like, oh my God.
Yeah, that was the bulldozer fuel tank taking off.
So now everything's okay.
Right.
Wow. I can't imagine what it was like when the...
Basically, it vented itself. The product got warm enough in the tank and then it vented through the cap. And that's why it shot up like it did.
So as you can tell, into the real world we go of flammable and combustible liquids. First of all, let's talk about the chemicals themselves. And if we would, let's turn back into the real world of chemistry of hazardous materials. First of all, you and I know it from the get-go. Liquids themselves don't burn. So what I'm going to ask you is a simple question. If I have a liquid material, but that liquid material doesn't burn, what if it's gasoline? Gasoline burns? Yes, it does, but not as a liquid material. What burns off of gasoline are the vapors they produce. Please be careful with this. Vapors, not fumes. Not fumes. Vapors. Vapors are a key element here. Vapors mean a gaseous substance. If I say fumes, I mean a gaseous substance with airborne particles. For instance, I may have welding fumes. There are solid particles of metal inside welding fumes. Radioactive fumes, the isotopes that are emitted are solid particles. But in the case of gasoline, we're talking vapor. We're talking strictly that of gas. Now, I said that they must produce vapors, but they're a liquid. So, how hot by fire or heat, how hot is that liquid surface before vapors are produced? If you tell me this story, then you would tell me what we call, you and I, the flash point, or often referred to as the FP, the flash point of the actual material. The flash point, by definition, is this: the amount of temperature required for a substance to produce enough vapors to flash momentarily. In other words, how hot is that liquid surface before vapors are produced? Tell me that, and you'll tell me the flash point of that liquid. Since liquids can't burn, they must be vapors, then we'll use the flash point to determine the following characteristic. Is it a flammable liquid or is it a combustible liquid? What's the difference? The difference is the flash point. You see, in the flash point, if I can produce vapors, listen carefully, if I can produce vapors at a temperature of less than, let's go this way, less than 130, let's say 139, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, if I can produce vapors at a temperature less than that, in other words, if this liquid is less than 140 degrees and is producing vapors, then that's a flammable liquid. However, if I must heat it up, the liquid must be producing heat or heat being generated to the liquid surface before vapors are produced. In other words, if the liquid has to be warmer than 140 degrees, 139 degrees, if it's hotter than this, it's a combustible. Does it burn? Absolutely. Is it dangerous? You bet you. But is it producing vapors? Depends on the flash point. And that's where we're going to get into today with you and I. Because today, we're talking fire in the real world of hazardous materials. Because you see, hazmat, as you and I know it, is not moon suits. It's not level A's. It's not level B's. It's not full encapsulation. Hazardous materials are something that can jump out of its container and hurt you and I. Because you're the hazardous material technician. You're the men and women that we're counting on to protect the first responders. You walk into this environment wearing a rubber suit, then you're a statistic. You're not helping. You're a number on the board. You're a poster child for the burn center. I can't have that. There's not enough of you out there to get hurt. So let's protect number one. So we take a look into it and we discuss it. Because what you're going to hear me say, some people will say, well, that's a little controversial. Here at FETN, we don't deal with controversy. We deal with reality. We don't deal with what should be. We deal with what is. We don't deal with what we'd like to see. We deal with what reality is. You're the men and women that make the difference. If I lose you, society as a whole doesn't stand a chance. This environment that we're so proud to protect is lost. So let's take a look at the real world of hazmat when it comes to flammable liquids. So into the system we go, into the deep system. Remember something. The United Nations of this world called Class 3 materials, the Class 3, that number 3 on the bottom of that placard, said that that was a liquid that burned. Stop. It was over. Our Department of Transportation decided to break it down into flammable liquids or combustible liquids. Let me tell you a little story here. I happen to be an instructor for the DOT. And when I get to this point in my class, they're not happy. But this is the real world, so let's deal with it. Let's take something simple. Let's produce a vapor, and we're going to ignite it, you and I. First of all, let's take something simple. Let's go back to the world of hydrocarbons. That's a good one to deal with. Gasolines, diesel fuels, motor oils. Okay, a carbon atom, very unstable. It needs 4 electrons in the outer shell. Now, this is chemistry. I know, but you remember we had the electrons, the neutrons, the protons, the croutons, all these cool things? Okay. What we've done is we're going to put some hydrogen atoms here. But when we come to this guy right here, instead of putting a hydrogen atom, we'll add another carbon. You see it? You called this methane before, CH4, natural gas. Add a carbon with all these little hydrogen kids hanging around here. That's ethane. Look, propane, C3H8. Look, butane. Listen, I can keep adding and keep adding and keep adding. What am I building? What am I building? It's a hydrocarbon chain. What's happened to the vapor cell? A gas that was once lighter than air, now by adding a single carbon became equal to air. Adding another carbon became heavier than air. Adding another carbon became twice as heavy as air. If I keep adding these carbon atoms, my friends, we're going to go from a gas to a liquid. That's right. From lighter than air to heavier than air, from a gas to a liquid. Keep adding, we can actually make polymers make a solid. But we're dealing with class 3 materials. So what we do is we have what's called a long hydrocarbon chain or low test fuel versus one that is a high test fuel which has a long hydrocarbon chain. Can I see this when I talk about flash points? Absolutely. This guy is going to take a lot of heat to produce vapors. This one takes little heat to produce vapors. How is that relevant to you and I? Gasoline produces vapors at a minus 40 degrees. Yet kerosene needs over 130 degrees to produce vapors. So what does that mean? I got to heat kerosene up. I got to heat diesel fuel up. I have to heat up lube oils. Heavy hydrocarbons have to be heated before they produce vapors. So right off the bat, our DOT comes back to you and I and says, okay, the threat now is this. A flammable liquid produces vapors less than 140 degrees. That's a threat. A combustible is not a threat because it doesn't produce vapors unless it's heated. So how can I protect it? I remove the labeling system. It's no longer present. It's no longer there. So it's not a problem. Wrong. Get up, smell the coffee. It's cooking. Here's the threat. What you weren't told is the harder it is to produce vapors, the easier it is to ignite the vapors. In other words, gasoline produces vapors very easily, but it's hard to ignite. Diesel fuel, combustible liquids, heavy hydrocarbons are very hard to produce vapors, yet they ignite very easily. Why? How is that possible? It's possible this way. It's possible under the format that we are looking at a system of ignition of the vapors. To ignite the vapors, what I have to do is break the chain. Do you understand? The easier it is to break the chain, the easier it is to ignite. Let me give an example of that. Let me give an example. If I had in my hand, imagine this if you would. I have a 2-foot fluorescent light bulb, 2 foot long, representative of this short chain, this gasoline. Here, a 6-foot fluorescent light bulb, the combustible liquid, the heavy hydrocarbons. Now, the production of vapor is the movement of the chain. That's how it produces vapors. So I move in my hand a 2-foot fluorescent light bulb and a 6-foot fluorescent light bulb. I'm moving a 6-foot light bulb and a 2-foot light bulb. Now, quick question. The ignition temperature is based upon how easy it is to break. Ask yourself this question. Which light bulb would break first? The 2-foot or the 6-foot? That's right, the 6-foot. The long chain breaks first because of its own molecular weight. It'll break first, easier, and more readily. What does that mean to you? It takes less ignition temperatures to ignite a long chain as it would to ignite a short chain. Let's put it in the street. Let's ignite propane, 1,203 degrees. Let's ignite gasoline, longer chain, 890 degrees, depending on the grade. 890. I ignited gasoline easier than I ignited propane. No, let's ignite a heavy hydrocarbon, kerosene, 406 degrees. Half the temperature to ignite gasoline, I could ignite kerosene. Yet it's going to burn dirtier because of the carbons, longer because of the hydrogen, and produce more BTUs, British thermal units. The heat output is twice that in a hydrocarbon heavy than that of a hydrocarbon light. I can burn dirtier, hotter, longer, more toxic using half the ignition temperature, and I just took the label off because it wasn't needed. That's the real world of hazardous materials. That's the world you decided to work in. You're the big hazardous material technician. You're the one that makes the difference in this real world. I just took your warning device off. That's what you have to live with. You need to understand that. You need to understand the differences, because the differences are not on paper. They're on life and death. That's the difference.
Welcome to this segment of Firefighter Safety and Survival. I'm Walt Boychik, Chief of the Edison Volunteer Fire Company No. 1 in Edison, New Jersey.
And I'm Larry Cohen, member of the New York City Fire Department, currently assigned to Ladder Company 12 in Lower Midtown Manhattan.
Your fire company's operating in a building and suddenly there's a partial structural collapse. What would you do?
One of the first things that we stress is radio transmissions to the incident commander. It should be an urgent or a Mayday transmission, indicating your name, your position, your location in the building, and the situation you're caught in. Also, include the fire conditions: heavy fire, heavy smoke, medium smoke, light smoke. The incident commander needs to know all this information.
If you have a hose line with you, continue to operate the hose line. This will give you some protection until you can egress the area.
Also, remember, a primary collapse may sometimes result in a secondary collapse. Don't lower your guard. A primary collapse usually contains voids and areas of refuge. However, keep in mind, a secondary collapse may occur, which may result in no voids and no areas of refuge.
A rapid intervention team that should be standing by at the command post should be activated to try to find your location and assist you in getting out of the building.
Aerial apparatus and tower ladders should be used. The bucket of a tower ladder can be raised above and over the building, possibly used as a hoist. It's not really recommended, however, in a life-saving emergency for firefighters. The tower ladder is an excellent piece of equipment for firefighter safety.
As an incident commander, the partial collapse of a building necessitates the transmission of additional alarms. You will need that additional manpower. Get them there quickly and early.
When a partial collapse does occur on the interior of a building, use your resources. You have hand tools, forcible entry tools, ladders, saws, everything that can be used to ensure your escape or your safety until, as Walt said, the rapid intervention team is utilized. Do what's ever necessary.
When transmitting additional alarms, be sure to special call additional rescue companies that might have special equipment that would be utilized on the fire ground. Such equipment would include possibly airbags and hydraulic rescue tools. Also, be aware that you might need outside assistance from other agencies that could provide heavy equipment that would be necessary on the scene of a collapse.
Also remember, if the collapse was due to a structural fire, the fire is going to continue to burn. Companies engaged in fire suppression with hose lines should continue their attack on the fire. One of the most important things that can be done is the extinguishment of the fire to afford the firefighters that are trapped in a partial collapse more time for rescue. In summary, surviving in a partial structural collapse includes several aspects which have to be looked at. Remember, a building in a fire condition is prone for collapse. A primary collapse we may be able to survive through. We must remember that a secondary collapse is sometimes inevitable. Warning signs may be obvious to us to indicate a collapse we should be aware of. It's the incident commander's responsibility to relay this information to us. Exterior firefighters should give information to company commanders regarding the weakening of a building, the water conditions, the smoke conditions. Operating inside of a building is an inherent risk of structural collapse. We have to deal with this. Remember, be alert, watch the building, and be aware of radio transmissions indicating a structural collapse.
This concludes this segment of Firefighter Safety and Survival. I'm Walt Boychik.
And I'm Larry Cohen.
We'll see you next time.